Hey, Greg, welcome to the Leaders Lab.
Thank you. It's such an honor. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's we get to chat just a tiny bit, but I'm just getting to know you and our audience, I'm sure wants to get to know you. So can I know you're an investor, I know you've got a big fund, I know you released a book that we're going to talk about, but I know life didn't really begin that way. So can you walk us through a little bit of your backstory?
Yeah, so to start out with, I am a autistic dyslexic, level one autistic, so you know, high functioning, and then level five severe dyslexia. So it's like reading for me is like maybe skydiving while you're trying to read a book or something. It's all moving around all the time. It's really hard. I have synesthesia, which is where I feel colors, and then I have this thing called savant syndrome, which I don't know why they have to put syndrome after that, but I'm a savant.
Syndrome
Um,
sounds like inescapable, doesn't it?
yeah,
Or
like a
something.
disease or something.
Yeah,
I'm like, hey, I thought this was supposed to be a good thing, you know? But um, I grew up in a foster and adopted family. Actually, my mom was a nun and my dad was a priest, and they wanted to take care of kids, but the church wouldn't let them. So then they left and did it on their own. I grew up in Oakland, California, which in the 80s was like an active war zone. So I got beat
sure.
up many, many times. I've had a lot of surgeries to fix the curb stomping and stuff that I had happen to me because of being autistic. Then I worked really hard to be able to speak like this to you and like kind of keep things together. My parents left Oakland and moved to this little town in the middle of nowhere, and we camped on our property while we built our own house. So we lived in tents for 2 years with no water, no electricity, no nothing, just tents
What
on.
was the little town?
It's called Grass Valley. It's near
Dude,
Tahoe.
dude, hold on. Do
Yeah.
you know, have you heard of Nevada Union High School up there?
That's where I got, yeah, well, I got kicked out of Nevada Union High School. Yeah.
Well, I graduated barely from Nevada Union High School.
No way, man. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Is
Yeah,
that
yeah.
wild?
So, yeah, I went to Nevada Union and I was spent most of the time, most of my time up at down either at the special ed trailers, at the bottom near
Yeah.
the field, or up at the top in the agricultural area because I was raising animals to try to make money.
We have
So,
a lot in common. I was actually born in San Jose, but we lived in Oakland when I was born, and my grandparents lived in San Jose. We were visiting them when my mom went
no
into labor.
way,
Yeah.
dude, that's crazy. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's nuts. We did not know that before we got on the show. That's
No, it's
really
all brand
cool.
new info.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can't imagine the amount of how challenging it was growing up with that, and like you said, growing up in a community early on in Oakland that was not super forgiving. What did you do to? I mean, I don't want to skip parts of the story, but like, how did you get here, man? Like, and when did that start? Like, when you were a kid, were you just super focused on like, I don't care what life throws at me, I'm going to get through it? I mean, were your parents
Yeah.
massive influences and supporters and you just being able to do whatever you wanted to do? Or, how did that go? How did growing up go for you?
Well, when you're poor and, we didn't have food sometimes. I mean, literally, I would wait outside the chicken coop for eggs sometimes so I could eat.
Wow.
Um,
You're like, come on, chicken, let's go.
yeah, I'd be sitting out there going, come on, somebody go in there and give me an egg. And then I have to wait a little bit because they're soft when they come out. So you have to sit there and wait unless it's a cold day. They cool down quickly. But
Wow.
yeah, and then I would go over to the wood stove with a pan and just cook it on the wood stove, make a fire, obviously, and then cook it on the wood stove. And then I would feed the livestock. So I would milk goats, feed my pigs, goats, the sheep, everything, right? And I was breeding homing pigeons and then I was catching rattlesnakes. So I would take a green stick and cut it down the middle, and then a green stick wants to close. So I'd put a little twig in between. And then if it's a cold day, you know where they're going to be. They're going to be in the sun. It's pretty easy to find hot rocks. On a cold day or on a warm day, they're going to be in the shade. So I'd go down to the creek and look at the rocks, and then I would come up behind them with the stick, and it would go around their neck and snap holding their neck and pin them to the ground, and then I would grab them by the back of the neck and throw them in a feed sack. And I would bring them to this place in Grass Valley called Pet Mine at the time, which was like a little pet store.
I know where it is.
And
I remember it. Yeah.
yeah, and I would
Yeah.
go to the back door and sell these. And the guy would like squeeze them for anti-venom, like take the venom out of them by having them bite onto a cup with like a fabric over the top. And then then he would clip their fangs, and then sell them as exotic pets. So I figured that was a lot better than killing them because they were all over the place. And I'd make $200 a snake, which is like crazy good money, you know. So
Sure.
back then that's like a week worth of work or more, you know.
Sure.
And then so I also used to where the fairgrounds are.
Yeah.
So across the street is Conway Ranch on Auburn Road, on Old Auburn Road, and I would work at Conway Ranch and change irrigation pipes and feed the livestock there, and then I would change in the barn and then take the bus to school and then do the same thing all over again. Get home about 9 o'clock at night. Um, and I was selling rabbits, Angora rabbits. I was selling uh, I was selling homing pigeons, and I would go to the neighbors and sell the pig meat and then I would use the deposit to go buy the piglings. And then I would, so I was an entrepreneur. I was
Yeah.
selling Rubex cubes at school. Um, I mean, I was just doing everything I could, I bought my car that way and my clothes.
Did it, it sounds like it started out of necessity, right? I got to eat. I got to find a way to, make some money. But then it also, like you said, it kind of turned entrepreneurial where it was like, maybe I can do more than
Yeah.
just getting by, right? When did that bug kind of bite you?
So I was trying to get out of the town. I didn't have any money, and I felt like I was in a dead end, right? Like Grass Valley's small, and it's not
How
like
old
there's,
were you at this time?
I was 18.
Okay.
And then I joined the Navy. And then I got kicked out of the Navy for having asthma, and because I couldn't pass their test because I'm special ed, right? I have all these things, so I couldn't get through. So they booted me out in San Diego I had $177.33. So I went and got a bunch of jobs. I had 4 jobs. I would work graveyard as a security guard. I would wait tables in the evening. And then I would do newspapers in the early morning at the like where you bundle them up. This is back when we had newspapers. And and then I would try to start a business during the day. And I did this for many years, and I would eat breakfast at hotel buffets. I would act like I was staying at the like park underneath, and then act like I was staying at and then I would eat happy hour for dinner. I would act like I was waiting for somebody, and like I was going to order a drink, and then I'd be like, oh, they never showed up. I guess I'm going to leave, you know?
Yeah.
And I did this for many years, and then uh, there was a lot of hardship during that time frame that I'm not mentioning, like, difficult times, like getting evicted, being homeless, having to go out and get money from all my jobs, like advances from all my jobs. Um, and then I started learning about uh, building businesses, and I started like really like getting into it instead of from a lifestyle perspective, but from a perspective of like, hey, this is like, if I go out and build a real business, I could do something big. So um, the first thing I did is I went out and I interviewed with this guy, Jim Eubanks, for like 6 months. I'd just show up in his lobby over and over. It was at a bank that it's now called Chase Bank, but it used to be called something else. And I would sit in the lobby and just like loiter. And he would send me away and tell me I looked like a slob. So I went to the thrift store, got a suit, came back. I would wash my clothes in the sink and use spray on starch to get everything and iron it. And then I did that. And then he finally hired me for East LA. And I learned this trade of selling money, like
What did
selling.
he hire you for? Like what was your first job with him?
It was to go out to East LA, talk to banks and brokers to use our money instead of their money to loan money to their customers.
Okay.
And because there was, you can only loan a certain percentage of your depository funds, otherwise you have an S&L crisis, right?
Right.
So So I did that, and then I was transferred, and I ended up doing really, really well because nobody was calling on East LA. And the only reason why he gave me the job is because nobody wanted it.
Yeah.
It was a really rough area. But I'm from Oakland, right? So I was like, hey, this is like cool. Like these are my people. I know how to roll with this. So then I went to I started learning how to do this, and I did really well. I got transferred to Denver um, to go and get the Midwest, and so I went from LA wearing a suit to Denver and going to Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, all these places, landing on little tiny airplanes on icy runways and wearing the first time I went, I was wearing a suit, and the guy that picked me up is like cowboy boots with like shit on them and stuff. And I was
Yeah.
just like, oh my God, this is and so I did really well, and I ended up starting my own bank, non-depository lender, right? And then I sold that, and then I did a biotech company, and then I ended up doing 12 startups and exited all 12 of them.
Over what period of time?
Uh, I mean, probably close to 30 years. I mean, because
Yeah.
now, the last two I sold to eBay, and that transaction won 4 private equity awards for transactions between 250 million and a billion. Um, and then I ended up working for eBay, and then I ended up it got spun out, and I ended up working for another company, and I ended up having to be there for 3 years. And then I went into politics because I was trying to help people like me, people that
Right.
came from my background, different marginalized people of every walk of life. And so I went into politics thinking that I was going to be able to help those people and get more money into startups because that's how I find my way out. And I was
Right.
like, this is a good way for other people. And I got to meet Barack Obama a couple times. That was pretty amazing. The guy's so cool.
Yeah.
Um, and then I went, and then, we had a president get elected that I was not happy with. So I quit because I was heartbroken. And I was like, I can't do this. So I decided I was going to help from the bottom up instead of from the top up. During that period of time is when I did all this research for the book, right? So it was like 5 years, 5 people. I spent $500,000 on the research. The whole research project was to find out why, when, and how founders failed. Because I was like, if I'm going to help founders get out of the hole that they're in and change their life like I did, well, then I need to understand why they're failing because 90% of them were failing.
Yeah.
So when
So
I,
by the way, Greg's book called The Startup Life Cycle, it just came out last week, right? Like
yeah,
days ago.
yeah,
Yeah.
after like 5 years of research and 4 years of trying to write it because of my, I guess they call them disability. In this case, it was a disability for sure.
Yeah, I think it's from what I mean, it's one of the biggest endeavors you can take on anyway. And then you had some obstacles you had to deal with along the way.
Oh man, it was way more than I ever thought it was going to be. And learning how the structure goes and having them change things and take out, and I wrote 5,800 pages. The book's, you know, 250 pages.
Wow.
So yeah, so that's why I opened the platform, startupscience.io, was because what I learned is that the failures, why founders were failing, almost 80%, as close to 80%, like 78.7, I believe, roughly, are failing for the same reasons in the research. So I was like, holy smokes, if I can fix that, then I achieved my objective. I don't need to help them all. I need to help these people I need to stop them from failing for the same reasons over and over.
Right.
And so that's why I opened up startupscience.io. It's a free platform for education for founders and da 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 da. And then that powers startup assistance programs, the aggregators of these startup founders.
What were some of the most common things that you were seeing repeat over and over again?
Well, I'll tell you the this does not make me popular, but I'll tell you the real reason is bad decisions. So then you ask, well, of course, right? So then I'm like, well, why are they making bad decisions? And then it said bad advice. Everybody was like bad advice. I did thousands of interviews. I mean, so I was like, well, who's giving you the bad advice, right? And it turned out it was startup programs investors, mentors, and other founders. And I was like, well, wait a minute. These people are definitely not doing this on purpose, right?
Right.
Trying to help, right? They're trying to help. So why is this happening? You know, why? And so the way it looked in the data, it's hard to explain without being too wordy, is basically they thought they were doing the right thing, but they're following the conventional thinking that everybody had followed, which then lined up with why this has been going on for 35 years. Why is 90% failing over 35 years? Right? I mean, Einstein would say that's insanity,
Right.
doing the same thing, expecting different results. So I was like, okay, well, we have to change the way that they're thinking about things. So that's why I wrote the book, because I was like, okay, here's the real startup life cycle. Here's how it works, and here's where people fail in those different stages. And then I created the platform because I had all this extra content and I wanted to make sure founders had it. So I put QR codes in the book and they scan it and then they can learn more free. And then I started pulling the entire startup ecosystem in one place. And that's because of the second reason why they fail, which is really because the whole startup ecosystem is fragmented. So if you look at like A round and out, these founders have money, they know what they're doing. Investors are, it's way less risky because there's financial numbers to look at and some sort of ability to be predictable and you know, probable. But pre-A round was like a scattered mess, like a yard sale of the whole thing is just everywhere. So it's like no wonder so many of them fail. So I thought, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start helping the pre-A round people because that's the pipeline for after A round. So if
Right.
I help this group, and that's because the data showed that 47% fail within the first 18 months. And the rest of them over the following 5 years for decisions they made in the first 18 months. So I was like, holy crap, I got to get involved early to save these people from failing. And then by doing that, help with wealth opportunity. I think when people say wealth equality that's the wrong way of looking at it. It's more like wealth opportunity,
Yeah.
opportunity to have wealth equality.
An equal opportunity to earn or to become wealthy, right? Not
Yeah,
necessarily wealth equality, but an opportunity to be there. Do you think along the way, it really sounds like you've taken, the challenges that you were born with, autism, and has it become like a secret weapon in a way now? I mean, certainly dyslexia, when you're writing a book, you probably wouldn't have thought of that as a secret weapon. But I'm wondering, like with like autism and stuff like that, does the ability to, it sounds like you can really focus and really get single track minded when you're going after something, including meeting with that mentor from the bank, right? Where it was like you were just relentless. Do you think that's a personality thing that you just have inherently, or do you think it was assisted by, the other parts of you that have created challenges, but maybe have also helped you become who you are?
that's a good question. I mean, I think that I definitely think different, right? I mean, I even had a brain scan done to confirm that. But like my operating system, it's just a different operating system. It's like you're on a PC and I'm on a Mac or something, right?
Sure.
And the advantages that it gives me are the ability to see the whole world different. So if everybody's looking at it this way, but I'm looking at it this way, that's definitely an advantage.
Right.
My savant thing has to do with patterns, and there's a lot of different definitions of patterns. But yeah, I have the ability to focus like crazy. Like I can sit down and focus on something for 12, 15 hours without ever leaving my seat, like water, bathrooms, food, nothing. And I don't even know what happened. I'll just come up when I'm done and say, oh, and it'll be like 9 o'clock at night,
Right.
Um, that seems to be something that comes with autism. Like just this hyper focus. And the other thing is that if I don't finish something, like if I'm trying to make something happen, it is extremely destructive to me if I can't finish it. So 12 startups and 12 exits, plus my investments, I've had 27 transactions, or I'm working on my 27th actually today. Um, I can say that some of that is just this persistent, consistent persistency, right?
Right.
Like just relentless and just refusing to give up. Just there's just no way. But I've also nurtured that.
Right.
So every year on my birthday, I choose something that I think is impossible. And then the whole year I focus on that one thing. So I have asthma, right? And I've ran a marathon, I swam a marathon, I rode a bike 525 miles up and down the coast of California, up these huge hills and stuff, wrestled alligators, swam with sharks. I mean, anything, drove a Formula One, been a bobsled, a thing. I mean, I could go on and on, right? I mean, it's just, I started when I was 18. The first thing was to graduate from high school, and then I did a bodybuilding contest because I was getting beat up. I was figuring if I lifted weights, people would stop beating me up. And then I got into it, and then it just kept going. And I still do it today. Like last year, I swam with sharks without a cage, just floating around
Wow.
there with them. It was pretty intense.
So, I mean, it kind of seems like all of those things that, I mean, were so hard when you were growing up at an early age. I mean, because really you said you started this at 18. At a certain point, you went, wait a minute, these are all challenges. And every time I rise up to meet them, I'm getting better, right? I mean, maybe you didn't articulate it that way in your head, but you behaved that way. You were sort of like, well, if trying this thing last year that I thought was impossible wasn't impossible and I got better as a result, let's just keep doubling down on that. Is that accurate? I
Yeah,
mean, is
I
that
went from I didn't want to be afraid anymore.
yeah,
Like I was just afraid all the time, and about everything, about talking, being around people, getting beat up all the time, being afraid of everything all the time, just constantly scared. And I started to feel myself sort of, closing off when I got kicked out of the Navy and I walked out those gates, man, that's a serious, you're sitting there going, oh my God, my parents can't help me. Nobody can, right?
yeah,
Nobody can help me. So, you get to a point where you're just like, I can't live this way. And
right,
this is not who I want to be. I want to be a successful person. And then I had to define my own success. I was sitting there on the curb outside the naval NTC RTC, just sitting there on the curb thinking like, you know, uh, thinking about this over and over again. Like, you know, who do I actually want to be? What do I want my life to be? And I spelled it out and I wrote it on this my discharge paper on the back of it, and then I was like, okay, I'm going to start taking these steps. And I never stopped, I never
right,
stopped. And now, there's very few things I'm actually afraid of anymore. I'm just kind of like, hey, I was terrified of the water, and I swam with sharks. So, I went
right.
swimming in the ocean, did a swam a marathon in the ocean. I mean, that's, you get over these things and you realize that these obstacles are actually your obstacles that you put on yourself.
Sure.
It's not outside, which is what it appears like. Oh, I'm afraid of that because of whatever, but they're actually, and then you start to realize that anything that's inhibiting you from doing something like writing a book even is your own self stopping you.
Right.
And then that changes your whole life when you actually face it, like realize that you're the problem. It's
Yeah.
not your disabilities or whatever, right? You're the problem.
It's the mindset.
Yeah. And I did a TED talk. Like, how crazy is that? I wrote a book and met Obama. I mean, this stuff is like, and I'm not the guy that, anybody
Yeah,
would ever
like by
guess.
design, you wouldn't have pegged you for doing that, right? In
Yeah.
advance. What when you say you wanted to take, kind of helping people with, either identified autistic on the spectrum, savant, all of that, and you were trying to help from a political standpoint, but then you said you got out of that. You didn't love the politics of it and decided to help from the kind of the ground up. What does that mean for you? Like, who are you helping and what are you doing in that community or in that part of the world?
So, what I decided was that founder, I think for me anyway, from my perspective, and this is my own vision, I think that the best way to fundamentally change your life, I mean, change it for generations, change the trajectory of not just your life, but your children, your children's children, is to build a business, a growth business, or a lifestyle business, something you can pass on to your kids. And so I decided that I was going to dedicate my life. So then, I think very logically, like most autistic people. So I said, okay, the first thing I need to understand is why are these founders failing? So I could choose what part of the life cycle, like pre-A round or after A round. And then in there, choosing the different stages in there so I could help. But then I decided that the first thing I needed to do is figure out and interview all of the people that were the startup programs that were a lot of the problems were being involved in, because these are great programs with great people doing good things, right?
Hmm.
Most of the time. There are some that are not so good. There's some, just like everything, right? And so I interviewed 4,867 of them and then wrote down every detail and recorded everything and transcribed everything. And that was in the data along with thousands of interviews with mentors and founders and investors and everything. Um, and so I said, okay, there's two things that I really want to work on in my life, two things that I think would make me feel proud when I die. And it's not all this selling businesses and things like that. That's just things for me, right? That's not really helping the earth and everything on it. So I decided I needed to help people, but I needed to help people that were otherwise marginalized, pushed aside, stepped over, stepped on, whatever. But I needed to help them help our planet. So anything that is on this little earth, because we all share it, we're all in it together. A lot of people don't realize that, what anywhere in the world does affects everybody in the world. It's a little
Sure.
planet, right? Um, so I said, okay, if in my holy grail of life, if I could take marginalized people and have them help themselves and at the same time help the earth, then that would be like the creme de la creme, right? That would be like, wow, this is amazing. So that's what I focus on. So I needed to start with the startup programs, the people that were aggregating these founders and helping them. But because the space is so fragmented and broken, one of the research things I did was like have these founders sit down at these tables and just say, so they were all people that said, I want to be an entrepreneur. I have an idea, right? So I just watched them try to find their way through. And then you look at it and you're like, well, that's definitely one of the problems. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go to these startup programs that are, collecting these founders. And then I'm going to give them some software that helps guide the founders with them and their help so that they have the ability to take more of them on and they have the ability to set in place some standardization. So in early stage, there's no standardization,
Right.
right? Like, so how are you supposed to get better, right? So schools, at least there's some standardization. And the concept is you learn from the past and then you educate based on history to move into the future. But in the startup ecosystem, early stage, it was just like everybody has their own opinion. There's some really, really, really rough things like post-revenue, pre-revenue. There's no definitions for these things. Or I'm in this round, I'm a pre-seed company, I'm a seed company, I'm a series seed or whatever. Even those definitions, there's no standardization. There's no gates that allow you to say, I'm here because of this. And even saying that you're at a certain stage based on a round is a mistake,
Yeah.
uh, because people call them it whatever, right? So you have to redesign the whole thing. And this is why this book took 9 years. The research was a huge part of it, but then 4 years writing it, not just because, I write like a 2-year-old, but on top of that, I use the computer, I dictate and then have it read to me. And it's a really slow process. Um, but also because it took a lot of like writing something and then going back and confirming it.
Right.
going back and saying, hey, this is what I learned. Is this sum it up pretty well and go back to all these people multiple times? And
But your idea was really to standardize something that had not been standardized, right? Or create an SOP for something that had no SOP in
yeah,
a way, right? To put some framework around it.
yeah, so that people, I mean, how do you prevent yourself from not going backwards if you don't know you're going backwards and
Right.
you don't know you're going forward?
You
How
don't
do
even have a
you,
clear definition of what forward is necessarily, right? If you could ask five people and they give you five definitions, and this is what I meant earlier when I was saying like there's parts of again what could be seen as a disadvantage that probably became an advantage because that's you looking at the world going everybody's running PC. Why can't they just see that there's a pattern here, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there's something happening here that I can see kind of clearly. Can't maybe articulate it that clearly, right? Which is why
Yeah.
it took a while to get it out, but you could see it clearly, right? And I think how did you lean that model into groups of people that had been disenfranchised though? Like how are you looking
Oh,
specifically to
cool.
work with people that are, in different neighborhoods or in, yeah, tell me about that.
Yeah, man. So I really am proud of this. So we power, we don't charge anything. We power nonprofits for free. Their founders are free. Everything's free, right? We have a whole lot of them, and they're diversified based on things like, uh, BIPOC people, people of color, women, LGBTQ plus people, people in neighborhoods that just don't have any money, whatever
Right,
race they are. Because really what it comes down to is if you don't have any money, uh, and you're born into a situation without any money, your education's going to be lower, your confidence and your ability to change it is going to be lower. Like it's the catalyst of a lot of these problems.
right,
So if you can go into these places that think, oh, I don't have a shot, and then give them some software for free that helps them learn, you realize something that I learned, and that is that we all have the same hardware. It's the software that's different.
sure,
Like my software is a little different because I'm autistic, but so is yours.
yeah,
And so is all of these people that are marginalized, right? So they have the ability to rebuild or build or expand their neural pathways just by focusing on something. You that's why if you practice piano, you get better because your neural pathway opens up, right? So basically, the more traffic that goes down a channel. So if you're poor and you don't have any money, the traffic that's going down your neural pathway is telling you I'm poor, and everything around you is making that stronger. So you have to build up a new neural pathway, which is confidence, and you can do that through a platform because they're not embarrassed, right? If you go through something that is like, school, and they go from a neighborhood like ones I grew up in, and then they go to, a nicer school, you feel really like this is not your home and you're embarrassed and stuff, right? And so by having an area that they can go into where they can, learn freely without being exposed uh, to other people that can judge them or even the feeling of that, then you can really start to make people feel like, oh, that's all it is? Oh, okay. You know,
right.
oh, boy, I understand that. And then, it starts to grow from there. So I I do that. I also speak at places. I speak at autism places. I speak at dyslexic. I speak at lower income neighborhoods where I'll do events and stuff like that. And I won't charge for those things a lot of times just because they don't have money. Like you don't want to take money from people that don't have money already.
Sure.
Um, and so that's what I do for that. A lot of that kind of work.
Well, I think your story is it's that's what they need. They need that someone's been in my shoes or maybe worse, and he's doing it, right? I mean, because it's funny when I went back and said, "Oh, our stories are so similar," except I didn't have the 50-pound weights that you had to carry, and drag through school, right? I mean, I also, at the same time you went in the Navy, I went in the Army. So,
Oh,
both,
really?
yeah, both
No way.
Oakland, both Nevada County. I was a year older than you when I was 19 and I was running out of options, but just through my own screwing up basically. And I didn't have money. Didn't have anything to look forward to. So I was like, I better do something, you know. So I joined the military, and um, I was able to stay in, you know, and got through there, and it was good for me and all that. Um, but it's funny, and I think people need that level of relatability. So now it's been all these exits later. You've had hundreds of millions of dollars, if not over $1 billion, I think, in exits now. You've written the book. The book sounds, by the way you were describing it, it's sort of interactive then, right? Like you could be on a chapter, scan a QR code,
And
and
then
then
get in and take classes. And all the
yeah,
classes are like watch, listen, read, experience. Those are the four places people learn.
that's amazing.
So it's meant specifically for people like me, right? You can go in there if you're, super smart or something. I mean, we power some Ivy League schools and stuff like that. We're the exclusive for Fulbright.
That's amazing.
And I co-founded the Fulbright Entrepreneurship Initiative. So we power a lot of universities, colleges, high schools, nonprofits, hackathons, maker labs. I mean, all kinds of stuff.
That's really
And
cool.
my strategy is like a Robin Hood strategy, right? You don't charge people without any money and you charge people with money, right? I mean,
Sure.
like the people without any money don't have any money, right?
Right.
So you either abandon them, which that's not going to happen under my watch, or you help them and find the money some other way, you know?
And you know the folks with the deep pockets, so you can find that. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
um, what would you change having gone through our education system with some of these challenges? What would you change if you could? If you could wave a magic wand in terms of how the education system works with folks with, you know, autism and other, you know, kind of related. Yeah,
Neurodiversities.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that like as far as like, you know, I hate that they call it lower ed, but lower education, right? So all the way up through high school. I think that a lot of it has changed, but my son's autistic, my daughter, and so they went through it recently, and it's still messed up. It's still really, really bad. Um, and we're talking public schools. I wanted them to go to public school, right?
right,
Not a private school. But I had to take my son out of public school and my daughter eventually out of public school because they understand it more, but there's no money being given to these programs. So they have no choice but to educate the masses versus the smaller group of people that need a different form of education.
right,
I think that one of the unique things I was actually talking to my wife about this, my best friend, my partner, my wife about this the other day, was that she's like, listen, they teach this thing called Common Core now, which is teaching you to understand how the math is done. But when I was going to school, they were teaching you to memorize it. Well, it always took me longer because I was trying to figure out how it worked. And autistic people, this is not uncommon that we have to understand all of it from the leaves of the tree down to the tips of the roots, or we don't understand any of it. Right. So we learn every detail, but they didn't want me to learn every detail. So I didn't
right,
understand any of it. You know, it was only later on when I learned how I learned was I able to change that. And I think that the important thing for them to do in school is to figure out how these kids learn, the
right,
neurodiverse, and then teach them the way that they learn. It's like teaching a blind person to read. And they're like, I
right,
use Braille. This isn't working, right? I
right,
think in upper education, I think that what's interesting, there's a report done by University World News, and they said that there's a 33%, a third of students going to university are leaving advanced degrees and going into entrepreneurship. So that says something, right? And I have an older daughter that I paid a lot of money to go to university, and she got a different degree. So naturally, being me, I went out and found out how many people pay a lot of money to get a degree and don't use their degree. Well, it's the majority, like the vast majority.
yeah,
And now they got a $250,000 debt hanging over their head, and maybe they're unhappy because they're doing something they don't want to do because they made that choice. So I think education needs to be more suited around jobs instead
right,
of around like you get an MBA. Well, that's broad. I mean, it's so broad, right? Like if you want to be a founder and you get an MBA, I don't even know if that would help you. I don't know because
Right.
I've never been to college, or university or whatever. But I don't even thought would even help you.
Right.
I talk to them all the time, and I'm like, man, don't they teach you this? And they're like, no, no, no. So I'm
It's
like, what do they
really,
teach?
really rare. Like the Leaders Lab, our main business is talent acquisition. So we mainly work with founders, either replacing themselves with, someone suitable coming in to run the company or as it scales, or with like Fortune 500, like mid-level management. And it is super, super rare that someone is in a job that is exactly what I mean, think about it anyway, when you're like 18 years old and they're going declare. It's like okay, I guess I'm going to be a computer scientist for the rest of my life. You know what I mean? Unless it's
Yeah.
super specific and they're super passionate about it and they just know that, like, that's who they are. Very
There are like
rare.
certain things like I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a lawyer, I'm
Right.
going to be a nurse, right? And
Right.
that stuff is like, okay, you go to school for that thing.
Yep.
But then the majority of it is just so broad
Right.
that you spend all this money and you get out and you're like,
Right.
and I think they're not setting people up for success. I
Half the
think they're
people that
setting
work
people
for
up for
me in
failure.
Yeah, half the people that work for me in recruiting have psych degrees. Well, I mean, it
Yeah.
helps them, but like they don't need it. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
exactly. Like you should learn, a job that specifically, I mean, there are huge industries like recruiting, and everybody knows the data, right? There's
Right.
like huge industries that employ massive numbers of people. Those are the industries they should focus jobs around
Right.
instead of being so neutral.
Right.
It's like I was talking to somebody about this the other day, and I was like, because they were arguing with me because they have a fancy degree from a fancy school, and I was like, well, let me ask you something. They were just building their house, so I said, when you built your house, how many contractors do you have? And they're like, well, we have a plumber, we have an electrician, we have a guy for the concrete, we have a person for the roofing. They went through the whole list, and I'm like, all of those are different jobs. So in your industry, that would be all under construction, but they're
Right.
different jobs with different trades and they have different contractors. Why wouldn't we teach that in other areas, right? Why would we say, oh, you have a master's in business administration? What the
Right.
hell is business administration anyway?
Right. It's the
You know what
catch-all.
I mean?
It's the catch-all. It's
Yeah.
the it's the I'm not sure, but yeah, it'll land. You know what I mean? It'll land because it's not too specific. So, what's next for you, sir? Like you've like you said, you've swam marathons, you've biked 500 miles plus, you ran marathons, you bought and sold a bunch of companies. You got your book out now after years. Anything big on the horizon for you coming up?
Yeah, the book hit and was and has been number one, like crazy.
I saw that.
Yeah, under a bunch of categories. And I was just like, I mean, I got to tell you, the anxiety associated with publishing a book and putting yourself out there, especially if you're me,
Yeah.
and I know that there's just about everybody else is smarter than me. So I'm like, I feel like this the dumbest guy in the room writing a book. Honestly, I have some imposter syndrome and insecurities, as you could tell, but so putting it out there is terrifying. It was like when I did the TED Talk, I announced I was autistic and I was like really worried about it, right?
Right.
And then all of a sudden people are buying it. And now it's that part of the anxiety went away. But now I'm like, well, I hope they like it.
Yeah.
You
It
know,
sounds like you almost thrive on it though. Like it's self-created anxiety, right? Like it's
totally, totally
yeah.
self-created.
And
Yeah.
and it's part of that fear of you stepping into bigger and better things, which you seem to do year after year. It's
Yeah.
um it's been amazing getting to know you a little bit and really inspired by your story and what you're doing and the people you're helping and have helped. It's really cool and it's really an honor to meet you.
Oh man, you know what? That is so kind and generous. Gratitude.
Yeah.
You're a cool cat and you're a great interviewer, and I really appreciate it. And for people listening, the book's called The Startup Life Cycle by Gregory
Yep.
Shepard, and also the platform's startupscience.io, if you want to log in and just do it. And I just I'm really grateful, that you took the time and energy to interview me. I really, really appreciate it so very much.
Yeah, man. No problem at all. You were a great guest. And we'll put the links for your book as well as the website in our show notes as well. So that if you're listening, you'll be able to get that with the show notes.
Cool. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you again and take care.